Welcome to the Classic Soap Operas podcast.
It's fantastic to be here, and looking at the sheer volume of notes we've got for this one, I think we're in for a real treat.
We really are. You know, for today's deep dive, we are heading north of the border. We are unpacking a true cultural phenomenon that, for over 2 decades, was a staple of Scottish television, and for a lot of that time, a fixture across the entire UK network.
We are talking, of course, about Take the High Road.
Or, depending on when you're watching, just High Road.
That's right, yeah.
And I think for so many people, especially if you didn't grow up in Scotland, or maybe you just caught it on daytime TV, the image you have is, well, it's very specific, isn't it?
Oh, it's all shortbread tins and misty locks.
Exactly. You're picturing the beautiful scenery, the rolling hills, maybe a wee dog running around the fictional village of Glendalough.
And to be fair, that's not entirely wrong. That was part of the appeal.
It's not wrong, but it's only like the surface layer.
Yeah.
The story behind the show is so much more complicated, so much grittier than the scenery suggests.
Yeah.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really get under the skin of it.
Right.
How does a show that was specifically designed to be a scenic, gentle replacement for a gritty mining drama become this cult classic?
And not just a classic, but a proper battleground. We're going to look at how it survived a full-blown network cancellation attempt through sheer fan power. I mean, we're talking a rebellion.
A real rebellion. And then how it tried to evolve, you know, from that slow-paced rural drama into a more modern soap, and then eventually its sort of strange death and digital resurrection.
It's a fascinating story of television production, regional identity, and just survival.
It really is. And the sources we're pulling from today are incredible. We've got extensive production logs, cast lists that span the entire run from 1980 right through to 2003.
And broadcast histories, which I have to say detail this incredibly turbulent, almost love-hate relationship the show had with the wider ITV network.
It's a proper saga. So where do we begin? To understand Glendalough, you can't actually start there, can you? You have to go back to what came before it.
No, you really can't, and that context is absolutely crucial. To understand why Take the High Road was created, you first have to understand what was destroyed to make way for it.
So take us back. Where are we?
We're in 1979. The UK is in a pretty turbulent state. We're on the cusp of the Thatcher era. The winter of discontent is still a very fresh, very raw memory.
Right.
And at that time, Scottish television, STV, had its own soap opera. It was called Garnock Way.
Garnock Way. Even the name itself sounds, I don't know, heavier, more industrial.
It was. It was set in a fictional mining community somewhere in the Central Belt, you know, between Glasgow and Edinburgh. It had been on the air for about 3 years.
So it was established.
It was established, and it was gritty. It was about working class life. It was about industrial struggle, union politics, strikes. It was holding a mirror up to the reality of that part of Scotland at that time.
So it was doing what a lot of great drama does, reflecting the world around it.
Exactly. And that, funnily enough, was the problem.
How is that a problem? I thought realism was the goal.
Not if you were a network executive in London in 1979, apparently. The feeling from the wider ITV network, who bought the show from STV, was that the schedule needed a change of pace.
What does that mean? A change of pace.
Well, they looked at Garnock Way, and the feedback was essentially, this is too grim, it's too depressing. They wanted a version of Scotland that was more
Palatable.
picturesque was the word they used. The production notes are very clear on this. The mandate from the network was, and I'm quoting here, lots of locks and hills.
Wow. So let me get this straight. They looked at a drama about the lives of miners and industrial workers and said, sorry, you're not pretty enough for the brand. Can we have some mountains instead?
That is the cynical reading, but it's also the accurate one. It was a very calculated business decision to pivot from industrial realism to a kind of rural escapism.
So Garnock Way was just axed.
Axed specifically to make room for this new scenic concept. They wanted to sell the shortbread tin version of Scotland to the rest of the United Kingdom.
That's brutal. It's almost like a form of cultural whitewashing. Let's ignore the collapsing industries and just focus on the lovely view.
It certainly felt that way for the cast and crew, who were suddenly out of a job because their fictional town wasn't aesthetically pleasing enough. But this is where the producers at STV got really clever.
Because they have their orders. Locks and hills, go.
Right. They have to build a new show from the ground up. And the original working title tells you everything about their initial concept. It was called The Glendu Factor.
The Glendu Factor. That sounds like a spy novel.
It does, doesn't it? But the factor is a very specific and often quite loaded term in Scottish history. It's the estate manager, the person who runs the land on behalf of the laird, the landowner.
Okay, so he's the middleman between the wealthy gentry and the local tenants, the crofters.
Exactly. And historically, the factor was often seen as the villain. They were the ones who collected the rent, enforced the rules, and, in the darkest parts of Scottish history, carried out the Highland clearances.
So the show was originally going to lean into that class conflict.
That was the idea, a show about power dynamics in a rural setting. But the network in London rejected the title.
Why?
They felt Glendu was too obscure, and more importantly, that an English audience wouldn't know what a factor was. It was, in their view, too specifically Scottish for a mainstream audience.
So they dumbed it down, basically.
They certainly simplified it. The setting was renamed Glendurach, which is a bit more generic. And for the show's title, they went for the most obvious, most famous piece of Scottish culture imaginable.
The song.
This song. They chose Take the High Road from the Bonnie Banks of Loch Lomond.
From the line, oh, you'll take the high road and I'll take the low road.
Precisely. It was instant brand recognition. Everyone in the UK knew that song. It immediately conjures images of romance, landscape, a bit of melancholy. It did all the marketing work for it.
And to get those lochs and hills, they went to the source.
They did. They filmed the show in the very real and very beautiful village of Luss, right on the banks of Loch Lomond itself. It was the perfect visual fulfillment of the network's demand. If you visit Luss today, it's still a pilgrimage site for fans.
Okay, I want to circle back to Garnock Way for a second.
Great.
Because you said it was brutally axed, but the producers were worried about the audience, right? They didn't want to lose those loyal viewers.
This is one of my favorite little bits of television history. It's so clever. They knew the audience was angry and upset, so they needed to create a bridge, a sense of continuity between the old, gritty show and the new, scenic one.
But you can't just have a character from one show walk into another. It's a different universe.
Well, you can't, but they kind of did. They hired an actor named Bill Henderson. In Garnock Way, he played a mechanic named Todd.
Todd the mechanic. Got it.
So, for Take the High Road, they cast Bill Henderson to play a mechanic. Yes, a mechanic with a very, very similar backstory and personality. The implication was clear. It was basically the same character who had just packed up his garage in the industrial town and moved to the scenic countryside for a better life.
That is brilliant. It's like an early form of a TV multiverse.
It is.
Don't worry, everyone. The mining town is gone, but your favorite mechanic escaped, and he set up shop by a lovely loch.
It was a comfort blanket for the viewers, a familiar face in a new setting. And it worked. The audience followed him. Production started, and the show launched in February 1980.
Okay, so it hits the airwaves. 1980, we've got the scenery, we've got our refugee mechanic from the old show. What was the central drama about, if not industrial action?
It was still about conflict, but a different kind. It was baked into the social structure of a Highland village. It was the factor and the laird versus the villagers. It was the gentry versus the crofters.
So classic class struggle, just with more tartan and tweed.
Essentially, yes. And the very first major storyline is so wonderfully ironic when you think about why the show was created. The plot was about the villagers fighting back against a plan to convert Glendurach into a massive leisure resort for wealthy tourists.
You're kidding me.
Not at all.
So the network commissions a show to basically be a TV tourist resort for the nation. And the first story is about the locals saying, we don't want to be a tourist resort.
The irony is delicious, isn't it? The show was tackling the theme of tradition versus commercialization, while the very existence of the show was a product of commercializing the image of the Scottish Highlands.
That's fantastic. But that tension must have provided a lot of good stories.
It did. It allowed them to explore really deep-seated Scottish issues like land ownership and community rights, but all wrapped up in this very gentle, accessible daytime drama package.
And of course, a soap is nothing without its characters. And looking through these cast lists from the 80s, my goodness, this is where the legends were born.
You can't even begin to talk about High Road without talking about one character in particular.
It has to be Mrs. Mac.
It is always Mrs. Mac.
Even people who barely watch the show know Mrs. Mac. She was an institution.
She was. Mrs. Mary Mac, played so perfectly by the late Gwyneth Guthrie. But what's really interesting from the production logs is that she wasn't an original character. She didn't appear until 1982 in the 5th series.
Really? That's shocking. It feels like she was part of the fabric from day one.
She made herself part of the fabric very, very quickly. She was the village shopkeeper and, more importantly, the village gossip, the busybody.
But calling her a gossip almost doesn't do her justice, does it? She was more than that.
Oh, much more. She was the moral surveillance unit of Glendarroch.
Moral surveillance unit. I love that.
It's true, she was that very specific type of Scottish matriarch. She saw everything, she knew everything, and she had a very firm opinion on everything, which was usually disapproval.
The twitching curtain.
The twitching curtains personified. And Gwyneth Guthrie's performance was just magnificent. The way she carried herself, the pursed lips, and the hats. My word, the hats.
The hats were a character in their own right.
They absolutely were. She was this perfect blend of comedy and menace. You laughed at her, but you also were slightly terrified of her. She was the keeper of the old ways.
And she was the glue for the village, in a way. So who else was anchoring the show in those early days?
Well, you had the bedrock of the community in Dougal and Grace Laughlin. They were there from the very first episode, played by Alec Monteith and Marjorie Thompson. They were the crofters, the people of the land, the heart of the show, really.
The salt of the earth.
Absolutely. And then you had the Blairs, Isabel and Jimmy Blair. And Isabel, played by Eileen McCallum, was another absolute titan of the show. She was there from episode 1 right to the very end.
She ran the local store, right?
She did. And in any small village soap, the person who runs the shop and the post office is the center of all information. They are the nexus point.
The information broker.
Precisely.
Now, looking at these production schedules, it's interesting. The show wasn't on all year round at the start, was it?
No, it wasn't. For the first several years, it had a seasonal model. It would run for about 40 weeks of the year and then take a long break, usually over the first quarter.
So it would just disappear from the schedules for a few months.
It would. You'd have a big cliffhanger in December and then nothing until April.
That seems like a risky way to build an audience for a soap. The whole point is the daily or weekly habit.
It was, and as the show's popularity grew, that became a bigger and bigger problem. The audience wanted their fix. So in February 1987, they made a huge step up. They moved to year-round production, broadcasting twice a week, every week.
And that signals a real vote of confidence from the network.
A huge one. It meant it was now playing in the same league as the bigger English soaps. And this is a really important point about the show's status in the wider UK.
Go on.
At that time, Take the High Road was the only soap on the entire ITV network that was not made by one of what they called the Big Five companies.
Right. Remind us who the Big Five were.
So the ITV network was a federation of regional broadcasters. But the power was consolidated with 5 huge companies: Central in the Midlands, Granada in the Northwest, LWT and Thames in London, and Yorkshire Television.
And they produced pretty much all the primetime hits.
They dominated the schedule. STV was a major player in Scotland, but on the national stage, it was a smaller company. So for them to have a flagship network-wide soap was a massive deal.
It was Scotland's seat at the big table.
It really was. It was punching well above its weight, giving a specifically Scottish cultural voice to the whole of Britain twice a week.
So we have this golden era in the 80s. The show is established, Mrs. Mac is terrorizing the village, the ratings are good. But then the 90s arrive and things start to get weird.
Yeah, very weird.
Let's talk about the music, because the evolution of the theme tune is maybe the best summary of the show's identity crisis.
Oh, it's a perfect timeline. You can track the executor's panic through the orchestration.
So phase 1, from 1980 to 82, was a folk theme by the band Silly Wizard.
Yes, a legendary Scottish folk band. It was all accordions and fiddles. It was very authentic, very traditional. It said to the audience, this is a story from the old country.
Then from 82 through most of the 80s, we get the orchestral version.
Right, sweeping strings, oboe, clarinet. It was very grand, very Sunday evening drama. It was dignified. It really leaned into the Bonnie Banks, a Loch Lomond romance of it all, comforting.
And then 1990 happens.
And the electric guitar arrives.
This is the infamous rock version of the theme tune.
It is. In March 1990, the show went through a massive revamp. The thinking from the producers was that the audience was getting older, and they desperately needed to appeal to younger viewers.
The classic, let's get the kids watching panic.
The eternal panic of television executives. They looked at the success of Australian soaps like Neighbours and Home and Away, which were huge with teenagers, and thought, we need a piece of that.
And their solution was to put a wailing electric guitar solo over shots of sheep on a hillside.
Pretty much. You had this heavy drum beat and this soaring, slightly dated-sounding electric guitar over these beautiful, tranquil shots of Loch Lomond.
The clash must have been incredible.
The sources say it jarred with the sense of authenticity of a Scottish village. which is the polite way of saying it sounded completely ridiculous. It was the show having a midlife crisis, buying a leather jacket and a sports car.
And it wasn't just the music, was it? They brought in new, younger characters to justify the new sound.
They did. This is when the McDonald family arrived in Glenrock Gary, Sadie, and Trish, and other younger characters like TJ Wilson. They were there to have romances and get into trouble and bring a bit more energy to the storylines.
Did it work? Did the kids start watching?
Well, the production team claimed publicly that the changes were a success, that they'd managed to freshen up the show and open the door for stronger, more modern storylines.
Right.
But it definitely alienated a chunk of the core older audience who just wanted their gentle orchestral drama back. It was a risky move, but it probably helped the show survive the transition into the 90s.
But the real existential threat wasn't an electric guitar. It came a few years later, in 1993. This is the big one.
This is the war. This is the moment that defines the show's entire history and its relationship with the network.
Set the scene. What happened?
In June of 1993, the director of the ITV network, a man named Marcus Planton, just drops a bombshell. He announces that Take the High Road is being dropped from the schedules in England.
Just
Gone. Poof.
gone. Turned off south of the border. The official reasoning was cold and brutal. ITV had statisticians who, they claimed, had proven that English audiences have had enough.
Had enough. Wow.
They said the ratings in England were declining. They also used the logistical excuse that many of the English regions had fallen months behind in broadcasting the episodes, which made scheduling a nightmare.
That feels like a very clinical, data-driven execution.
It was a business decision from London, but it was received in Scotland as a massive cultural insult.
And the backlash was immediate. It was unprecedented for what was seen by some as just a quiet daytime soap. This wasn't just a few angry letters. This blew up into a national incident.
It was raised in Parliament.
Yes. Scottish MPs tabled early day motions in the House of Commons, debating the cancellation. You have to understand the political context. This is the early 90s. The debate around Scottish devolution is gaining serious momentum.
So this wasn't just about a TV show anymore.
Not at all. It became a proxy for the entire debate about Scotland's place in the UK. Here you have a London-based executive unilaterally cancelling the only major Scottish drama on the national network. It played into all the anxieties about Scotland's voice being ignored.
And the newspapers got involved?
The Daily Record, a massive Scottish tabloid, organized a huge public protest. They were printing coupons for people to sign and send in. They were running front-page headlines. It was a full-on campaign. The fear was that if the English region stopped buying it, STV wouldn't be able to afford to make it just for Scotland.
So canceling it in England would effectively kill it everywhere.
That was the fear. It was an existential threat.
So what did STV do? Did they just have to accept the decision?
No, and this is where they showed incredible grit. In a huge gamble, STV announced they would continue to produce the show anyway, even without the guaranteed network money.
Wow. How could they afford that?
Well, this is the tough part. It came at a huge cost. They had to make it cheaper. The number of episodes per year was cut. And the entire cast, to their immense credit, agreed to take salary cuts to keep the show on the air.
They literally paid to save their own show.
They did. It was an extraordinary act of collective will to save this thing they had built.
And did the English regions? Did they come back?
The fan power actually worked. It was astonishing. The pressure was so immense that Carlton, the London broadcaster, reinstated the show in October 1993. Central and the Midlands brought it back in November.
So the rebellion won.
It did, but it was a fractured victory. Some regions were stubborn. Tyne Tees in the Northeast and Yorkshire held out for years. They didn't bring it back until 1996.
So if you lived in Leeds, you just had a 3-year gap in the story.
A huge gap. And when it came back, they would often just pick up with the old episodes they hadn't shown. So you'd be watching a Christmas episode from 1993 in the summer of 1996. It was chaotic.
That must have been so confusing for viewers. And it's around this time they changed the name, too.
Yes. In July 1994, it was permanently shortened to just High Road.
Why?
The official line was that it was what everyone called it colloquially anyway, but it also felt like part of that push to modernize, to make it sound a bit slicker, a bit less like a folk song.
But despite being saved, it feels like the show is now living on borrowed time. It became a zombie show on the network.
That's a very good way to put it. It was alive, but it was being treated terribly by many of the broadcasters. The network slowly began to dismantle it again. Meridian and Anglia dropped it in 95. Granada and Yorkshire got rid of it for good in 97. Carlton, who had brought it back, dropped it again in '98.
So it was a slow, painful retreat.
It was. By the late '90s, the only broadcasters still showing it were the ones in the so-called Celtic fringe, Scottish, Grampian, Border, and UTV in Northern Ireland. It had gone from being a UK-wide show back to being a purely regional one.
And this created a bizarre logistical problem that the notes call the stockpile. What was that?
It was a nightmare, because STV was still filming episodes on a regular schedule to keep the cast and crew employed, but the broadcasters were showing them less frequently or taking long breaks. This meant a huge backlog of unaired episodes started to build up.
So the show was months or even years ahead of what was being broadcast.
Exactly, and it led to these massive jarring gaps in transmission. For example, it was completely off air from June to August in 2001. It disappeared for months again in 2002.
That's a death sentence for a soap. You kill the viewing habit.
You completely kill it, and it shatters the illusion. For the few loyal fans left, you'd have the story stop abruptly in May, and when it returned in September, the characters would be acting as if it was the next day, but the leaves on the trees outside your window had completely changed.
It's amazing it limped on for as long as it did under those conditions.
It's a testament to that core Scottish audience. But eventually, the writing was on the wall.
The end finally came.
In April 2001, STV announced a review of the show's future, which is always television code for "we're sharpening the axe." The final episode, number 1517, was finally screened in April 2003.
23 years. That is an incredible run for any show.
A phenomenal run. And what's really quite touching is looking at that final cast list. Some of the originals were still there.
And Mrs. Mack made it to the end.
Mrs. Mack was there right until the end. She survived everything. And so did Isabel Blair, Eileen McCallum, who had been there since the very first episode in 1980. Cheek Cherry was another long-termer. They saw it through to the very last frame.
So when you look back, what is the legacy of a show like this? It must have left a mark.
Oh, a huge mark. And you can even see it in the little details, like the sponsorships.
Right, who was sponsoring it?
Brook Bond and Scottish Blend Tea and Mother's Pride Bread.
You cannot get more quintessentially domestic and Scottish than that. Tea and toast.
It tells you everything about who the audience was and how the show was woven into the fabric of daily life. This wasn't a glamorous, aspirational show. This was a show for your afternoon tea break.
And there was merchandise, too. Books.
Yes, there were several novelizations published in the 80s with titles like Summer's Gloaming and Danger in the Glen.
Who was writing these?
This is a wonderful detail. They were primarily written by a man named Michael Elder, and Michael Elder was also an actor in the show. He played the village doctor, Dr. Wallace.
You're kidding. The doctor was writing the novels.
He was. And he wrote many of the early TV scripts as well. It speaks to that tight-knit, almost cottage industry feel of the production. Everyone wore multiple hats.
That's amazing. But for most soaps, when they end, they just disappear. Maybe you'll find a grainy clip on YouTube. But High Road has had this strange and wonderful afterlife.
It really has. It's had a proper digital resurrection, which is a lovely final chapter to its story. In 2010, years before this was common, STV made a very smart move. They uploaded almost the entire back catalog to YouTube.
Wow, for free.
For free. Suddenly, this show that had been discarded was available globally. Scottish expats in Canada or Australia could suddenly reconnect with this piece of their past. It was an incredible archival project.
And it didn't stop there.
No. In 2014, it was rebroadcast on the new STV local channels. And then in 2020, right in the heart of the modern streaming era, a full chronological rerun began on the STV Player app.
So you can literally binge watch all 23 years of Glendalough now if you want to.
You can. BritBox even licensed a selection of classic episodes in 2021. It's found this whole new audience as a kind of nostalgic comfort watch.
Why do you think that is? In our fast-paced, high-drama TV world, why are people going back to this very slow, gentle show?
I think it's a window into a world and maybe a version of Scotland that feels very distant now. It's about community. It's about a slower pace of life. In a world of global anxiety and online noise, there is something deeply soothing about watching Mrs. Mack get worked up about the price of stamps.
It's just a remarkable journey. A show created to be scenic wallpaper, becomes a symbol of national identity. It's killed by the network, resurrected by its fans, tortured by schedulers, and then finally preserved forever by the internet.
It's a perfect case study in the tension between the global and the local, isn't it? The national network wanted a generic, pretty product. The local audience fought to protect their specific, quirky community.
And in the end, the most global platform of all, the internet, is the thing that saved this hyper-local show.
It's a beautiful paradox.
So to bring this all together, what's the big takeaway from the story of Glen Rock?
Well, for me, it poses a really provocative question for television today. In our current era of global streaming, with Netflix and Disney making shows designed to be watched in 200 countries at once, could a show as specifically local, as unapologetically regional, and, let's be honest, as slow as High Roads ever get made today?
That's a great question.
Or was it a product of a very specific time in broadcast history, a time when we had the patience for the gentle pace of village life?
Is there room for Glen Rock in the age of the algorithm? Something for us all to think about.
I'd like to think there is. We all need to take the high road sometimes.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below with your favorite memory of Glendora.
We'd love to hear it. Was it a character, storyline, or was it that magnificent rock guitar theme tune? Let us know.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
Goodbye.